thank you for your presentation, Volodymyr. I don't know if my experience is really wide, but what I'm certainly is really passionate about this topic. So it's really a pleasure and an honor to be with you today. I would like to share with you something from our Italian experiences on this subject, education for sustainable development, both in teacher education as well as the integration of this cultural movement of sustainability in subjects, in ordinary subjects and school curricula. And of course, our national experience is far from being concluded, yet I would rather say that it started recently, but it's ongoing. And I'm really happy to learn from each other, from our experiences. So I organized this the next 20 minutes into 4 parts. The first one I will describe in synthesis the Italian context and try to highlight some milestones in the history of sustainability in the Italian school system. And I would like to point out which were, in my opinion, the main drivers that allowed us to come to today situation in which we are starting this school year the introduction of a new teaching, civic education, which is really grounded on sustainability and Agenda 2030. And then conclude with some lessons learned and a lot of next steps to be undertaken. So as a context, as Volodymyr said, I am from the Italian Institute of Documentation, Innovation and Educational Research. My institute is a public research body which works side by side with the Ministry of Education. Our headquarters is in Florence, where I am now, where I live, but my institute has also some regional offices in northern Italy, in Turin, in Rome, and in southern Italy, in Naples. While, of course, and as you know, our Ministry of Education is based in Rome. As you can see, in Italy we have 20 regions. And at the governance level, what the governance of the introduction of new policies in the school system is launched, of course, by the Ministry of Education and accepted and transferred into the territory by the Ministry regional offices of the 20 regions. Of course, my institute is aside the Ministry of Education, and in this sense work closely with, from the research part, monitoring, teachers training on behalf of the ministry, and is in relation with the ministry regional offices in the regions. At the governance level, it's very important that we function around the idea of networks of schools which are set on a geographical basis. Geographical area, homogeneous area, calculated by reachability, territorial affordability of being in within a network of reachability, are aggregated in networks, and within each network we have 318 networks of schools throughout the country. We designate a single school which function as a training central pole, which is a hub. This hub works on behalf of the regional offices of the ministry and widespreads national teacher training plans and support the measures of introduction of new policies, whatever the policy can be. Just to give some size and numbers, we have 8,000 schools, institutional education throughout the country, and our teaching workforce is composed by 800,000 teachers, mostly of which are women, aged more or less averagely in their 50s. So we have a more female population compared to OECD country, and also a more aged population of the teaching workforce. I would like to draw for you a very simple timeline of what happened and of the sustainability in the Italian school system. So I draw some milestone starting very early in 1955 to highlight that the idea of civic education in the sense of moral, democratic education, citizenship. Now, of course, our idea of citizenship is very wide and global, and I somehow make similarities between the concept of sustainability and citizenship. Just to highlight that this idea of teaching civic education was introduced in our school system by the government since the very beginning of our republic after we became a republic in 1955. And this changed several times through the governments, through the history of our country, of course, to come briefly, quickly, to this recent school reform we had in 2015. This school reform was introduced by the Democratic Party, which was governing at that moment, and the school reform embraced all sectors of the schools, and it was named La Buona Scuola, which means the good school. We perfectly know that that year was a very important year in which the United Nations approved the Agenda 2030 for the Sustainable Development Goal. So in that moment, with the reform of the good school, started also our national mandate and history to introduce this topic into the school. The first experience was done headed by the Ministry of Education. So in the school year 2015-16, it was introduced the environmental education. And the reference teacher for each school was chosen to be the person in charge of this teaching, seen as a transversal teaching. It was not the Ministry of Education in that moment that welcomed this idea and promoted it into the school system. Instead, it was the Ministry of Environment. In the space of a couple of years, the Ministry of Education was pushed in introducing Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals into a new teachers' mandatory training period for all newly qualified teachers. This was really a landmark in our history, since from that year, every year, all the tens of thousands of new teachers we employ every year are immersed, are confronted, benefit from some laboratories on this topic of sustainability and Agenda 2030. The next year, this topic of sustainability was widespread and extended to all in-service teachers, so to the total teaching workforce in our country. This was also done thanks to my institute, who implemented an environment, namely Scuola 2030, School 2030, value creation education, implementing a portal in which this could occur. We came to the last year, 2019, in which the Ministry of Education finally reintroduced civic education in all curricula, in every curricula, since the pre-primary to the upper secondary education, focusing on the idea of sustainability as a very central and important topic, not the only one, but one of the three most important topics. I mentioned the role of my institute in supporting in-service and newly qualified teachers training to sustainable development. This was done through this portal, Scuola 2030, in which not only we could share, and we are sharing resources on learning plans to support the teachers in designing plans with respect to the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, but also we implement an online massive course for teachers, which is to be followed autonomously in self-learning, but is really a useful resources accessible to all Italian teachers. As I mentioned before, in this journey of introducing throughout the years the Agenda 2030, always more in a more transversal way throughout our school system, there was one driver of change who played a really important role in this process and assisted and supported the ministry in understanding how important was to act immediately in support of this vision. The role of change drivers was implemented by ASVIS. ASVIS stands for Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development. It's a coalition of the civil society established in 2016, so the year after the adoption of the Agenda 2030. And the main purpose of this coalition is to raise the awareness of the importance of the agenda throughout the sectors of life, and to mobilize efforts in order to achieve and support the achievement of SDGs. Today, this alliance is really an intellectual force in our country. It counts more than 280 allies, where allies is institutional members. My institute is one of the allies of this alliance. And this alliance functions through the working groups. Each member borrow to the alliance experts from their organization to work specifically in dedicated working groups. There are working groups for each SDG and also transversal working group. I am involved in the working group of Goal 4, quality education, on behalf of my institute in this alliance. This leads to something really interesting and important, which is carefully attentioned by our government today, is the release of a yearly report on the state of our country toward the achievement of the SDGs. This report is released every October, every year, and it really details the situation of our country, also at the country level, but also with specific focus at the regional levels. And policies, new policies are analyzed in this report with respect to the support they envisage towards the achievement of the SDGs, or on the contrary, with the critical elements they have, because they could not only do not work in favor to the support of their achievement of SDGs, but they could also draw in the other sense. So this report is really very important, and is presented every year to the government, to our ministries. The work of this alliance was so important and growingly important throughout these recent years since its constitution, that our Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, already declared several times recently that he now believes that a constitutional reform is needed in our country to make reference to sustainable development in our constitution. This is really something really breaking in it means that the policymakers are attentive to this, to the work, scientific, detailed, careful, respectful, that this alliance conducted so far. This is the reason why the last year of our development of school policies was embraced by this idea of sustainability as a concept. The Ministry of Education in this case, was supported by the work of ASVIS. And so we came to last year, in which the introduction of this civic education, reintroduction of civic education as a teaching, was introduced with careful attention to sustainability. Here I took an excerpt from the competencies plan issued for this teaching, saying that this teaching goes beyond traditional disciplines and should assume the role of transversal value framework. And this is very important because it goes out from the boundaries of traditional disciplines, of separated disciplines, and works at the value level. And this recalls so much the value framework of Agenda 2030, in which values are the 5 Ps, as you remember: people, planet, peace, prosperity, and partnership. So this is something really extraordinary. In brief, characteristics of this teaching. It hinges around 3 main topics. Topic areas. One is a citizenship and constitution, namely not only Italian constitution, but also referring to European and international constitution or institutional ordinaments. Digital citizenship as, of course, a transversal and formidable enabler of sustainability achievement. And third, global citizenship and sustainable development. The characteristics of this teaching is that it is transversal. It doesn't have one teacher in charge of this teaching, but the teaching is mandated to all teachers of all disciplines. And this teaching is assessed formally with marks in the ordinary way as ruled by the ministry. To support the implementation of this new teaching, which was started this year, although the law was approved last year. Of course, this is the first year of implementation, a very special year, as we all share and know. The ministry introduced a competence framework for students at all levels, and also a national teacher training program because, of course, this such transformatory action needs to be accompanied. So, in synthesis, what we have is we have three main areas of accompanying actions that will support the implementation of this measure. We named a teacher referent for civic education in each school. This teacher is to be trained by the regional school offices, the offices of the ministry on the region, and it is this teacher needs to be trained in order to be able to transfer the teaching to his or her colleagues in the school. So it will be a cascade teacher training. Where teachers are starting now to be trained with modules of 40 hours, in which 10 hours are traditional teaching and 30 hours are action research, in which this referent teacher is to be implement and work with his colleagues in the school. In the school, we have civic education teams, of course, working side by side to this referent. And we are starting now a national monitoring action, which will be performed by the Ministry of Education, supported by my institute, and the organization of an online national libraries of online resources, not only for teachers training, but also to be used by teachers in their teachings to implement this civic education in their disciplines throughout the levels and throughout the grades. In synthesis, before leaving the floor to and opening the discussion with you, some lessons learned and a lot of challenges for the future. I think this is a long journey to school innovation, and this is a wonderful occasion. In 2015, when this concept of sustainability was first introduced, as I mentioned before, it was introduced with the support by the Ministry of Environment, which was quite odd, and really was lacking of the strong message of sustainability, that sustainability leverages on pillars that not only touch environment, but also economic, social, institutional pillars. But this soon came when the Agenda 2030 was introduced massively into our teachers' training. Let me say that this massive introduction could have been stronger, could have been more pervasive. It was relatively weak and also short, but it was a great beginning, starting from massive and allowing all teachers to be able to be confronted to this content for the first time. Civic education, adopted last year, implemented this year for the first time, a very special year, of course, leveraging on three themes. Sustainability, one of these is central, together with digital citizenship, which we know is which is a transversal enabler for sustainability, but also citizenship, local and national and international citizenship. We are starting now with the implementation of the accompanying measure. We now have one referent per school, 8,000 teachers that are starting to be trained in these very weeks, and they will be called to perform a cascade training model with respect to their colleagues. With the assistance of my institute, with a national monitoring that we are starting this year. There are a lot of challenges schools are facing now, because of course we know that this is a very special year. Schools are struggling to go on and keeping school open or closed and distance learning, depending on the regions and on the degree of widespread of the pandemics, which is a challenge per se. But with respect to civic education, schools are called to design a vertical curriculum, to implement it according to the ministry guidelines, to follow a competency framework and to design it, to test it. And this will be, of course, a challenge. I think this is an occasion extraordinary because it is a value framework. Civic education is a Trojan horse for strategy, in my opinion, for school innovation. And this is why I chose this visual metaphor of the needle and the threads, because in my opinion, what civic education can be is, in the metaphor, the needle, but sustainability culture could be the threads that remain in our culture, in our young generation, next generations, thanks to this effort seen in its value of the framework, of the value framework. And okay, so I think this is, we can discuss and open the floor for discussion now. Thank you.